Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of the React crash course. In episode 1, we looked at the environment required to run React, how to install and start the default React application, and then we took a look at the basic file structure of React. In this episode, we're going to have a deeper look into JSX, how it renders to the DOM, how you can use data and functions in JSX, and then we'll look at some styling options. So if we open back up our code, one thing we should just cover actually is if your code had stopped and therefore if we refresh the browser the page cannot be reached, you can always just hit npm start and after a couple of seconds the default application will be back up and running. So inside of the app.js file, which if you remember is inside of the src or the source directory, this is where the JSX code currently is that's being output to the DOM. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this code. So we're left with just the div with the class name of app and hit save. So there we go. Now we've got a blank page and a warning saying that logo is defined but never used. So we're going to go ahead on line 1 and remove that. We're also going to remove importing the SCSS file because we'll come to styling later in this episode. And for now, I'm going to delete the app.css file. Move to trash. And actually, one thing we should have done in the last episode is deleted this app.test.js file because we don't need that either. There we go. So JSX, as I said in the last episode, is just like HTML but with a few subtle differences. So if we go ahead and write div class name, because again like before class is a reserved word, so to define the class in JSX it's class name equals, and we'll call this our header, close brackets, okay, and then inside of here we'll do an h1 with our header name of team app and hit save. And there we go. We've got our h1 tag on our page. It's being rendered to the DOM. Now, if we look at the elements of this page to give you an idea of what's happening, inside of the div with an ID of root, if you remember, is inside the public folder, the index.html. That's the entry point for our HTML. And then our index.js file is finding that div with an ID of root and inserting our app component, which is the app.js file. So as we can see here, we've got div with an ID of root, then we've got div with a class of app, which is this line here. So again, JSX is converting class name into class on render. And then inside of that div, we've got our div with a class of header, and we've got our h1. And you can go on and you could define more information here. Welcome to our app and hit save, and then we get that paragraph there. The important thing to remember with JSX is that when you're creating a component, and in this case the component is called app, and then you're returning the JSX, everything that you return must be within one ultimate parent. So in this case, it's our div with the class name of app. If we were to define another div outside of here, and just pop some text in and hit save, we're going to get an error. Module build failed. And that's because we've now got two parents being returned inside of our component. If we took that div, cut that and paste it inside of our div with the class name of app, it works absolutely fine. Now, there might be instances where you don't want to have to wrap everything in divs. What you can do as an alternative is you can use empty fragments. So if we hit save there, what we'll notice then in the output is we've got our div with an ID of root, then we're straight into our header. And we could then put an h5 outside of that, which will work absolutely fine. So again, div ID of root, div with a class of header, and outside of that div we've got our h5, and that works absolutely perfectly. And pretty much all of the tags that you can imagine for HTML will work inside of JSX. So that's the basics of JSX. but that's not really much use to us in building an application. A lot of the time we're going to want to be pulling in data from APIs or other sources and outputting them in our JSX files. So let's take a look at how data works. With our header div, at the moment we're defining tmap as the name of our h1 tag, but if we move back up outside of the return but inside of our component function, we could define let header name equals tmap. And then in order to use data inside of JSX, we need to use the curly braces or curly brackets. And we can then simply just write header name. And if we hit save, the tmap as the h1 is still showing. We could just change that text to show you. There you go. The good thing about using these curly brackets to insert data directly into JSX is that it's not just static variables you can use. We could, for example, write 2 plus 2, and that calculation will happen on render and output the result. We can also, as another example, use Booleans and then use ternary conditions inside of our JSX. So if we do let show header equals false, we could then wrap inside of this code show header true, then else we could just say no header. And if we save, you can see it says no header. If we change this back to true and hit save, it's back to tmap. Something else you can do is if we insert a button tag in here with click me as the label, we've now got a button with click me. So again, outside of our return function, we'll set a function of clicked, the fat arrow, and we can say console.log I was clicked. And then on our button, again in HTML you would write on click, but in JSX you use camel case, so it's on click with a capital C equals, and we can just say clicked. Hit save, and now when we click this button in the console, we're going to get I was clicked, I was clicked, I was clicked. Now, one important distinction with functions inside of JSX is that if they require parameters to be passed, for example, if we wanted to pass a value through when this was clicked, we could put value as a property of this function, and we could console.log the value. But at the moment we're not passing any value through, so if we click that button, we're not getting anything at all apart from this event that's been passed through. We would need to initiate the function and put a value in there, I was clicked. But this isn't going to work, and I'll show you why. If I hit save and refresh the page, it's called that function as soon as the page has been rendered, because it has direct access to it. So instead, if we're going to pass variables through to functions on things like on-click events, we need to contain them in an empty function. So I'll define a function and hit save, and now if I hit it, it will work. So it's just important to remember, if you're passing properties through to functions, you'll need to define them inside of an empty function statement in order for them to work. So that's passing data through to our JSX, and how you can use things like functions or static text or Booleans with ternary operators to output data. Now, this isn't much use to us at the moment because it's not very dynamic, but in the next episode we're going to be looking at just that. We're going to be building our own custom components with dynamic data. The final thing we want to cover in this video is styling. So in order to style our elements, let me just move this back to header name, and we'll get rid of the rest for now. So there are four main ways that you can style elements in JSX. The first is by styling inline. So we could, for example, add the property style equals, and because this isn't going to be static text, it's going to be a data object, we need to put curly brackets. And the style property requires an object with key value pairs. So we'll initiate that object with some more curly brackets, and we could write, for example, background color black, and hit save. And that's going to add a black background to our header div. Now you'll notice, unlike CSS, which would be background hyphen color, all lowercase, the way JSX works with styles is all camel case, a little bit like the properties of your div elements. We could go further, we could say color white, and hit save, and we could add some padding. Now there are two ways you can add padding to elements with style objects, and that is to either define a numerical value of 20, which is going to add 20 pixels, it's going to convert our 20 to pixels, or we could wrap that in quote marks and define it as 20 pixels. We could also say 20 pixels for the left, 10 pixels for the top, 20 for the right, and 10 for the bottom, and hit save. And again, that's shifted it slightly because we've defined it as 10 pixels from the side. So that's the first way that you can style elements in JSX. The second way would be to define an object. So we could say constant my style equals, and we can simply take this object, pop it up here, and then inside of here say my style, and hit save. And again, that's pulled through exactly the same. So if we change the background color, that's changed to grey. Now, inline styles do have their place, and we'll come to that shortly. But most of the time, you're going to want to style in CSS. So let's take a look at generating a CSS file that we can then pull through to this. So instead of just creating a CSS file like we had before, we're going to do it a slightly different way. If you hit the plugins option in the left-hand side menu of Visual Studio and search for Easy Compile, you'll notice a library here, or a plugin called Easy Compile by Jack Conway, and it's the fourth one down on my list. I already have it installed, but just to show you, you can click on it and this would say install. What Easy Compile does is it's a listener service that will look for TypeScript, Less, Sass, SCSS, Minify, JS, CSS, etc., and compile them to an output file automatically for you. Now, I prefer to write my CSS code in SCSS because you can nest your element styles in there, and you can do things like mix-ins and design color palettes. So it makes it a lot easier to manage your CSS code. So if you go ahead and click install on that and head back to our directory, within the source directory we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it app.scss and hit enter. So there we go, we have an empty SCSS file. Now we called our div header, so we can go ahead in the SCSS file and say $main color equals black, $second color white, for example. And then we can go ahead and define our dot header for the class name of header, background hyphen color is main color, and color second color, and then we can add some padding of 20 pixels and hit save. Now that's now generated, as you'll see, an SCSS file which has compiled a standard CSS file for us to import into our app.js. So at the top we're going to reinsert the line that we removed, and we're going to say import app.css, import app, /app.css. And if we remove this style code here and hit save, there we go. So that baffled me slightly, but I forgot what we've done is we've overwritten this class name with the style object. So we remove that, and that's our style. And if we update our SCSS file and maybe give it a margin of 5 pixels and hit save. There you go. You'll see that that CSS is rendering directly into the page. The final way you might want to handle styles is exactly the problem we had there, is overwriting class names. So you could then overwrite that with background color red, for example, and we need to make sure it's in an object, and if we hit save. And the reason you might want to do that is a lot of the time the styles of elements can be conditional on data. So it might be that you have a div with a background color of black, but depending on the data, or depending on if somebody's just clicked that item, you'll want to change the background color. And it would be a waste of time creating whole new CSS classes for items that are clicked or are data dependent. It's much easier to overwrite the style inline. So there you go. There's a look at JSX, how it works, how it renders to the DOM, how you can import and use data in your JSX, how you can call functions, and how we can style our objects. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at building our own custom components, which is the biggest benefit of using React.